In 1999, a teenage couple vanished without a trace after a graduation party. 20 years later, a construction crew blasting through a ravine wall uncovers a crushed motorcycle, reigniting a cold case that the town thought was long buried. The morning started like any other on the Overlook Ridge construction site. A low layer of cloud clung to the treetops as the highway crew prepared for the next blast. The section of rock they were clearing had proven stubborn, refusing to yield even after 2 rounds of controlled detonations. The project, an expansion of Route 7 to ease traffic between Fairfield and the state highway, had already run weeks behind. Dave Travers, the site foreman, squinted at the jagged wall of stone. He wiped sweat from his brow with a sleeve darkened by dirt. "We're good on the line?" he called out, voice raspy from years in the field. "Checked and double-checked," came the reply from Travis Neal, the blaster. "Cables are set. We're clear." Travers gave a nod. "Do it." Neal triggered the box. The explosion thundered through the valley, sending a wave of dust and rock down into the ravine. The impact was sharp, concussive, enough to rattle the bones of the men watching from the ridge. As the smoke began to clear, something caught Neal's eye. "Hold up," he muttered, already moving forward. At the base of the exposed rock face, buried in loosened soil, was a glimpse of mangled metal. "What the hell is that?" Travers asked as he descended alongside him. The closer they got, the clearer it became. A twisted, rusted motorcycle, its front frame nearly flattened, rear axle bent into a V. The flame decal on the fuel tank, though faded and chipped, was still visible. But that wasn't all. Neal pointed with a shaky hand. "Look at that!" Just beyond the bike's wheel, something leathery and dark protruded from the dirt. As Travers leaned in, he realized it was a jacket, decaying, wedged beneath rock, and tangled in it, what looked like a femur. "Back up," Travers said, voice tight. "We need to call this in." The sheriff's office arrived first, then the state forensic unit. Soon the ravine was crawling with people in uniforms and hazard gear. Yellow tape was wrapped around the discovery site, and a white tent went up over the motorcycle as evidence teams began carefully digging. The jacket was removed with surgical precision. Inside, they found a rusted chain necklace and a torn wallet, its contents mostly water-damaged. But one item survived, barely: a laminated school ID card. The photo had warped, the ink faded, but the outline of a name could still be made out. E. Barrett. As bone fragments were recovered, the lead technician made a quiet note to the sheriff. "We're looking at more than one set of injuries. Blunt force trauma, no burn damage. My guess? They were already dead or unconscious when the fire damage set in. We'll know more after dental and DNA, but this wasn't just a crash." The sheriff, a man named Ray Hunsley, nodded, expression unreadable. "Get everything logged." That night, the story made the local news, a brief segment buried between a farming expo and a weather update. The anchor read it with minimal emotion. A construction crew working on the Route 7 expansion near Overlook Ridge made a grim discovery today. A damaged motorcycle and what appeared to be human remains were recovered from a ravine wall unearthed during blasting. Authorities believe it may be connected to a decades-old missing persons case from Fairfield. Across the state, in a modest apartment in Charlotte, Jillian Barrett, 32, stood in her kitchen with a mug of cold tea in her hands. Her eyes were fixed on the TV. The grainy drone footage showed the ravine, the yellow tent, and the partially exposed bike being lifted onto a tarp. It was old, discolored, but unmistakable. She took a slow step forward, breath caught in her throat. She whispered, "That's his bike." A flame decal, always too flashy for the quiet boy who built it. But Eli had loved that bike like it was part of him. Her phone rang a minute later. A detective from the Fairfield PD, calm, polite, cautious. "We believe the motorcycle belonged to your brother. We're contacting family to assist in identification. Would you be willing to come in?" The drive back to Fairfield was long and heavy. Jillian hadn't been back in over 10 years. Her mother had moved to Florida. Her father passed shortly after that. The house they grew up in was now a rental. There wasn't much left in town for her, except, it seemed, the truth. She arrived at the coroner's office early the next morning. She was led to a small room where a tray of items had been laid out: the decayed leather jacket, a fragment of wallet, the charred class ring. Her hands hovered over the tray. "That's his," she murmured. "That ring. It was our dad's. He gave it to Eli before graduation." The medical examiner nodded. "We'll still run dental confirmation, but this helps us get ahead of it." Was she there too? Sadie? "No trace of a second body," the examiner said. "At least not yet." Jillian took a long breath, but her thoughts were already racing. She was only 6 when Eli disappeared, but she remembered Sadie. Her brother had adored her. Everyone thought they ran off together. Some said she was pregnant. Others insisted he was trouble, and she just got caught in it. She had always believed the story didn't add up. Now, finally, something was surfacing, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Back at the Fairfield Police Department, Sheriff Hunsley stood beside a dry erase board already half filled with photographs, maps, and pushpins. The case from 1999 had never been officially closed, but it had gone cold quickly, labeled a likely runaway case with insufficient evidence of foul play. Now, with Eli Barrett confirmed dead and a suspicious crash site, it became a homicide. "We're reopening it," Hunsley said to the handful of detectives in the room. "Barrett's sister is cooperating. We'll start with family and friends, but I want someone from outside on this, someone with no ties to the old guard." Caleb Voss didn't look like a man who belonged in Fairfield. He was clean-cut, 35, quiet-eyed, more methodical than charming. His transfer from Raleigh came through just 2 weeks before the construction team blasted open the ridge wall and unearthed the wreckage. He hadn't unpacked half his boxes when the sheriff handed him the reopened cold case file. "I want someone who wasn't here in '99, Sheriff Hunsley had said. "Too many friendships tangled in this one." Caleb didn't argue. He opened the file at his desk: thin, mostly faded notes, and a brief incident report. 2 teenagers, Eli Barrett and Sadie Quinn, disappeared after a graduation party. Their last confirmed sighting was leaving a friend's house just after midnight. No traffic cameras, no highway toll records. Their assumption? They ran off together. Now, 25 years later, one of them had surfaced, or rather, what was left of him had. Caleb studied the crime scene photos, the crushed bike, the fragments of jacket, the ID. The ravine was remote, but not unreachable, just steep enough to swallow secrets. He marked the edge of the ridge and the surrounding terrain on a fresh map, then highlighted the trail leading to it. Something about the scene didn't sit right. Why hadn't they found this back then? He looked at the name on the sister's contact form, Jillian Barrett, and underlined it. It was time to start knocking on doors. Jillian stood in the attic of her childhood home, the early light of morning spilling across boxes she hadn't touched in over a decade. The house still smelled like cedar and old paper, familiar, even comforting in a way she didn't expect. She reached into a box labeled Eli, School Stuff, and gently pulled out a faded denim jacket. The collar was still folded the way he liked it, and in the pocket, a torn receipt from a motorcycle parts store. She smiled without meaning to. Then the memory came back, clear as a photograph. She was 6, sitting on the front steps with a popsicle melting down her wrist. Eli had just rolled his bike to the curb, revving it lightly as Sadie jogged down the driveway. Sadie's long hair bounced behind her, her hand clutching a small overnight bag. Jillian had waved at her. Sadie smiled and waved back. "Don't wait up," Eli had said, grinning down at her. It was supposed to be one night, a post-graduation ride, maybe a weekend somewhere along the coast. But they never came back. Jillian blinked the memory away. The moment froze, stayed with her like the last lines of a song you never quite forget. Back downstairs, she placed the jacket gently on the kitchen table, then sat. Outside, the town was waking up. Somewhere in it was a piece of the story she still didn't have. News spread fast in Fairfield, faster than facts, faster than official statements. It was the kind of town where rumors traveled through hair salons and corner booths before the sheriff even briefed his deputies. At Riley's Diner, 2 waitresses stood behind the counter refilling sugar jars. One of them, Dottie Myers, leaned in toward the other. "You hear what they found up on Overlook?" she asked quietly. "That old Barrett boy's motorcycle, crushed all to hell." The other nodded, eyes flicking toward a customer, pretending not to listen. "He ran off with that Quinn girl, didn't he?" "Sadie," Dottie said. "The Quinns never talked about her again after that summer." "Well," the other said with a shrug, "they said she was pregnant." "You think that's true?" "Who knows? I just remember she stopped coming to church and her mama started wearing sunglasses indoors." By the end of the day, people were talking like they'd known something all along. They ran off together. It was impulsive. No, she had reason to leave. It was all conjecture. 25 years of silence cracked open by rusted metal and bone fragments. Back at the station, Caleb noted the murmurs carefully. Sometimes local talk got details right before the paperwork caught up. Other times, it was just noise. Still, he found himself scribbling one question into the corner of his notebook. If they ran, why did only one of them end up in that ravine? It was a dusty morning, and Jillian was back in the attic. The light had shifted since yesterday, casting longer shadows across the wooden beams. She opened another box, one she barely remembered packing. Miss C, summer '99. Inside, she found Polaroids curled from age. Some were of family cookouts, others of birthday parties. Toward the bottom, she found a photo that stilled her hand. Eli crouched next to his motorcycle, tightening a bolt. Sadie stood behind him, arms crossed, grinning with her head tilted. There was something intimate in the photo, not just teenage affection, but a sense of shared ease. Jillian had heard the stories too, that it was a fling, a thrill ride, but this wasn't that. This was real. Jillian brought the photo down to show Caleb. He studied it in silence for a moment, then looked up. "You think they planned to leave together?" "They weren't running," Jillian said. "They were just in love." Caleb pocketed the photo gently. Then maybe someone didn't want them to leave. The Quinn's house sat at the edge of a tree line, paint faded, lawn yellowed from neglect. Caleb pulled up in an unmarked sedan and stepped out, adjusting his badge at his belt. He knocked twice. The door creaked open halfway. A man in his 60s with sharp cheekbones and a stiff posture looked him over. "You're with the police." "Detective Caleb Voss, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your daughter, Sadie Quinn." The man didn't flinch, but his grip on the door tightened. "We've said everything there is to say." "I'd appreciate a few minutes." "She was with Eli Barrett the night they disappeared. We found his remains." That caught his attention. He opened the door wider but didn't invite Caleb in. "And her?" "Still missing." He gave a hard nod. "Then you should be looking for her, not bothering us." Before Caleb could respond, a woman's voice called faintly from within the house. "Who is it?" "No one," the man said quickly. Caleb leaned slightly to the side. Through the narrow gap, he saw a woman seated at a window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her hair was gray now, tied back, her eyes hollow. "Mrs. Quinn," Caleb said gently, "I'm here about your daughter." She looked at him but said nothing. After a beat, she turned her face back toward the window. The door closed quietly a moment later. Caleb stood there a few seconds longer, then turned and walked back to the car. There was no welcome here, only silence. Caleb stood by the window in the coroner's office, arms folded, as Dr. Renee Atkins laid the report on the table behind him. The blinds were half drawn, letting in thin bands of light that streaked the linoleum. "It's him," she said. "DNA's a match. Eli Barrett." Caleb turned. Cause of death? Atkins tapped the report. Massive internal trauma consistent with a high-velocity impact. Crushed pelvis, rib cage collapse, cervical spine fracture. He hit the rocks hard, likely died instantly. Any indication he lost control? The motorcycle's damage isn't consistent with a single-rider fall, she said. We found side panel scarring and deformation, like it was struck from the side before it went over. Another vehicle? At that angle? Probably. Paint traces were too faded to type, but it lines up. Caleb exhaled slowly. So, something forced him off that cliff. Dr. Atkins didn't answer right away. It wasn't just an accident, Caleb. He looked down at the file, then quietly folded it shut. Thank you. The wind scraped dry grass along the edge of the ridge as Caleb stood with a pair of deputies at the ravine's lip. The cleanup team had finished extracting all viable fragments and materials. Flags still marked the spot where the bike had landed. A deputy pointed to a narrow outcropping further down the slope. That's where the jacket was found, bone fragments close by. And nothing else? Caleb asked. The man shook his head. We widened the search 50 feet in all directions. No second set of remains, no clothing, no jewelry, not even a shoe. Any animal activity? Some, but not enough to explain a full absence. Caleb crouched by the drop, eyeing the slope. Jagged, steep, but not bottomless. A fall could kill, but it could also leave someone injured, trapped, hiding. He scanned the tree line. The woods beyond were thick and untamed, especially back in '99. A person could disappear out there if they wanted to, or if someone made them disappear. He stood again, brow furrowed. Something was missing. Sadie Quinn had vanished, but not into this ravine. Jillian flipped through a folder on her lap in her motel room, legs tucked under her on the bed. Her hair was damp from the shower, and an open soda sat forgotten on the nightstand. She had gathered old memorabilia, school yearbooks, notes, flyers from storage, not because she expected answers in them, but because sometimes memory needed props. One flyer caught her eye, a hand-drawn invite to the 1999 senior graduation party. Torn along the edges, beer stains smudging the bottom. She nearly tossed it aside until something in the photo stapled to the back made her pause. It was a group shot. Someone must have taken it in the yard near the fire pit that night. Most of the teens were facing the camera, arms looped, red solo cups in hand. But in the background, partially obscured by smoke and shadows, stood a man in uniform. Her eyes narrowed. It was Sheriff Roland Dorsey. He wasn't smiling, just standing off to the side, arms crossed, watching. Jillian's skin prickled. He had told everyone he was off duty that night. Said he hadn't been there at all. She snapped a photo of the flyer and sent it to Caleb with a single message. He lied. Caleb waited on the porch of a modest bungalow with paint peeling from the shutters. It was the kind of house that hadn't been updated since the early '90s. The lawn was tidy but lifeless. The front door creaked open after the second knock. Roland Dorsey, older, heavier, white hair thinned out, stepped out in a buttoned flannel and slacks. He didn't smile. "Detective," he said, "you're early." "I appreciate your time," Caleb replied calmly. "Mind if I come in?" "I do, actually. My wife's inside. She's not well." Dorsey stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him. Caleb nodded, unfazed. "We're reviewing cold cases connected to the recent discovery in Overlook Ravine. Your name came up as the lead investigator on the 1999 disappearance." Dorsey gave a short grunt. "Yeah, Eli Barrett and Sadie Quinn. Vanished after a party. Case went nowhere." "Did you attend that party?" Dorsey's face hardened. "No, why?" Caleb showed him the phone screen. "You're in this photo, taken that night." Dorsey squinted at it, then shrugged. "Might have stopped by. Lot of kids drinking, and I was worried someone would start trouble. Didn't stay long." "You didn't include that in your statement. It wasn't relevant." "You also led the search effort," Caleb said. "Assigned the search area, including the ravine." "I did what any sheriff would have done," Dorsey snapped. "We searched where the evidence pointed. Caleb tilted his head. Except the evidence was off. You never reported tire marks, vehicle debris, signs of a chase. Because there weren't any, Dorsey snapped. Look, whatever you're implying, be careful. You're poking at ghosts. You'll stir up things that don't need stirring. Caleb held his gaze. The truth doesn't mind being stirred. Dorsey stepped back, his jaw tight. Interview's over. Caleb didn't argue. He slid his notebook back into his coat and turned to leave. As he reached the sidewalk, he glanced back once. Dorsey was still there, watching. Arms crossed, eyes hard. Do you think Dorsey is hiding something? Share your thoughts below. Where will Caleb's investigation lead him? And what happened to Sadie? Give the video a like and keep watching to find out. The air smelled of motor oil and lake water. Something about it hadn't changed in 25 years. Jillian stepped cautiously into the boat repair shop, eyes scanning the cluttered workbenches and racks of outboard motors lined like tombstones. The back wall bore a faded poster of the Kansas City Royals curling at the edges. A bell above the door gave a half-hearted jingle as it closed behind her. "Can I help you?" came a voice from behind a hanging tarp. A man emerged, stooped with age, his coveralls stained with grease. He wiped his hands on a rag that looked older than her. "I'm looking for someone who might have worked here back in 1999. I'd like to ask a few questions about Eli Barrett." The man blinked, then nodded slowly. "Worked here that summer. Smart with engines, good with people. Never saw a boat he couldn't fix." "I'm his sister," Jillian said, her voice measured. "They found his remains 2 weeks ago." The man's face fell. "I'd heard... I'm sorry." Jillian showed the map to Caleb in the parking lot outside the sheriff's office. The sun was low behind them, casting long shadows over the hood of his cruiser. "Ridge Lookout," she said, tapping the corner of the drawing. "It's near where the bike was found, but not the exact drop point." "Could be where they were before the crash," Caleb said, "or where someone intercepted them." They drove 30 minutes up a winding dirt road, following the sketch more than any GPS. The road narrowed into a trail, then into little more than packed earth and overgrowth. Caleb parked at the base of a slope. They hiked the rest of the way. The woods pressed in close, tall oaks and thick underbrush, the smell of pine and rot hanging in the air. 10 minutes in, Caleb spotted something through the trees. There. Nestled in a pocket of clearing was a small shack, half sunken into the slope behind it. The roof had caved in on one side. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges. Caleb pushed it open. Inside, it was musty and dark. A shaft of light cut through a hole in the roof, illuminating dust swirling in the air. In one corner sat an overturned chair. Tools littered the floor. In the far corner, a rusted metal toolbox lay half buried beneath debris. Jillian knelt beside it. "Help me." Together, they pulled it free. Caleb pried it open. Inside, water-damaged papers, a broken wrench, some burnt scraps. "Anything legible?" he asked. She sifted through the remains. One edge of a paper was marked with a faded town seal, something official once, now unreadable. The rest had been singed beyond recognition. They found nothing suspicious. It was a dead end. Back in town, Caleb sat at his desk reviewing drone footage of the ridge area. Nothing conclusive, just endless trees and a rocky outcrop. He was about to shut the laptop when a knock came at his door. It was Marcy, dispatch. "This came in on the tip line," she said, handing him a printed message. Anonymous. He skimmed it quickly. "Ask about the sheriff's truck parked by the ridge the night they vanished. Some of us remember." Caleb looked up. "No call log?" "No. Online form submission." He read it again, then leaned back in his chair. The truck. It was always about what didn't add up, where Roland Dorsey had been, and what he had left out of his own reports. Caleb opened the archive vehicle logs, but the entries for that week in '99 were gone. Missing, redacted, or never recorded. No GPS in those days, just paper and ink. He grabbed his keys. It was time to find the old-timers still willing to talk. At the edge of town, a man named Wyatt Strong sat on his back porch with a tin of chewing tobacco and a portable radio tuned to nothing in particular. He looked up as Caleb approached. "You're the new detective," Wyatt said. "I hear you've been around a while." Wyatt smirked. "Long enough to know which rocks no one wants turned." "I heard you used to volunteer on the fire watch patrols." "That was a long time ago." "Then maybe you'll remember if a sheriff's truck was parked up at Ridge Lookout one night in June '99. Wyatt didn't respond immediately. He spit into a rusted can beside him. "I remember seeing headlights out that way. Odd night, a lot of yelling on the scanner. Then it went quiet." "You ever mention it to the sheriff?" "Didn't need to," Wyatt said flatly. "It was his truck." Caleb raised his brow. "You're sure?" "I'd bet my life on it." Caleb sat at the corner desk in the dusty back room of the Fairfield Municipal Building, surrounded by old county ledgers and land lease microfiche files. The clerk who'd let him in was long gone. He'd offered Caleb a key and told him to lock up when he was done. It was after dark now, the place quiet except for the low hum of the ceiling fan. He thumbed through records year by year until he hit 1999. That summer, the ridge property above the ravine had been leased to a private party for seasonal game hunting, according to the notes. The name listed under the lease made Caleb sit back slowly in his chair. Roland Dorsey. He stared at the paper for a long moment, his thumb frozen on the page. Dorsey had led the original search party when Sadie and Eli vanished. He'd told reporters the couple had probably run off, maybe gotten lost in the woods. "We'll give them time to turn up," he'd said. Now Caleb traced the parcel number to an aerial map. The land extended all the way to the tree line above the ravine, the same ridge that overlooked the spot where Eli's crushed motorcycle had just been found. He took out his phone and called Jillian. "Can you meet me? I need to show you something." Jillian stood on the cracked sidewalk outside the municipal building, arms folded across her chest as Caleb handed her the printout. Her eyes ran down the page, stopping on the name. "Roland Dorsey leased the ridge," she said slowly. "In '99? He nodded. "Months before they disappeared." "But he was the one searching the woods. He was the one who told my parents to give it time." Her voice faltered, then hardened. "He stood in our kitchen and said Eli would turn up with a sheepish grin." "Maybe he knew he wouldn't," Caleb said. Jillian shook her head. "He was supposed to help us. He led the whole town on a wild goose chase." She looked at the line on the map again, then past Caleb toward the dark horizon. "I remember the way he talked to my mother, like she was hysterical for thinking something was wrong." Caleb studied her face. "I want to know why he leased that land and what happened up there." Jillian's hand tightened on the edge of the map. "Then we start with what's missing." Later that night, Jillian returned to her rented Airbnb, a modest two-bedroom cottage just past the town library. It was quiet when she stepped inside. The porch creaked behind her as she closed the door. She dropped her keys in the bowl and turned on the hallway lamp. The living room looked untouched. The kitchen was still neat. She passed through the room slowly, something tugging at the edge of her awareness, like a draft that didn't belong. Then in the bedroom she saw the desk drawer ajar. Her breath caught. She hadn't left it that way. The box where she'd kept Eli's things, photos, the old sketch map, a few loose notes, had been rifled through. Papers were still there, but the folded map was gone. She backed out of the room and checked the front door. Locked, the windows latched, no glass broken. Whoever had come in had either picked the lock or had a key. She stepped back and dialed Caleb. "Someone's been in here," she said, voice tight. "They took Eli's map." He was there 10 minutes later, flashlight in hand, checking door frames and windows. "No sign of forced entry," he said. "Could be someone wanted that map enough to risk breaking in quietly. Or someone who didn't want us to find what it pointed to." The next morning, Caleb sat at his desk at the Fairfield PD, elbows buried in open folders. Jillian sat across from him, flipping through the crime scene photos from 1999. The ones taken from the ravine showed only surface brush and tire tracks, nothing that clearly indicated a crash. But what bothered Caleb more were the old statements. Dozens were missing, and others had been heavily redacted, even though there was no ongoing trial or juvenile involved. One page in particular stood out, a witness statement from the night of Sadie's graduation party. The text had been blacked out and the name removed. He flipped through the corresponding report. The listed officer was Roland Dorsey. "Half of these weren't filed properly," he said aloud, "or they were pulled and never resubmitted." Jillian glanced at him. "You think he covered something up?" "I think the man who leased the land where Eli died and led the search for your brother also handled the evidence that would have raised red flags." He shut the folder and sat back. Jillian waited near the back entrance of the county hospital, arms folded, eyes scanning every nurse who exited. When Kristen Allman finally appeared, shoulder-length blonde hair now streaked with gray, her ID badge swinging against Scrubs, Jillian stepped forward. "Kristen? Kristen Allman?" Kristen blinked at her, then recognition softened her features. "You're Eli's sister. I was hoping you had a few minutes." They sat at the edge of a courtyard bench flanked by half-dead shrubbery. Kristen clasped a takeaway cup, her fingers trembling slightly as Jillian eased into it. "You were close to Sadie," Jillian began, "right up to graduation." Kristen looked away. "We were friends, yeah, but things shifted that spring. She stopped coming around." "Do you remember why?" Kristen hesitated, then exhaled. She wasn't herself. Nervous, distracted, like she was always checking over her shoulder. I asked her once. She brushed it off. Said she was tired, but I saw the look in her eyes. "What kind of look?" Kristen swallowed. "Fear." That word hung in the air like something neither of them wanted to touch. "Anything else?" Jillian asked. She never talked about it directly, but I think someone was making her feel trapped. Jillian nodded slowly. The pieces weren't fitting yet, but something in her gut said they soon would. Caleb crouched by the yellow tape, squinting at the shallow trench that the forestry crew had dug while clearing brush near the ridge. A few white fragments jutted out of the earth, irregular, small. At first glance, it matched what they feared. "You think it's her?" Jillian asked quietly behind him. "We won't assume," Caleb replied, motioning the forensics team over, "but it's possible." They watched in silence as the team carefully extracted the fragments. Every movement was precise, measured. Jillian felt her breath catch every time a new bone surfaced. But an hour later, the lead forensic tech, a woman with calm eyes and gloved hands, walked over and shook her head. "They're not human," she said. "Canine, most likely. Maybe coyote." Jillian stepped back. She didn't know whether to feel relieved or disappointed. The weight of unknowing still pressed down on her. It was just past 7 p.m. at a dusty gas station outside the town of Red Hill, population under 3,000. The sun was already dipping, casting copper light across the parking lot where a few pickups idled. Inside, the flickering TV behind the cashier played the evening news from a regional affiliate. The motorcycle found in the ravine off Ridge Road has been identified as belonging to Elijah Barrett, missing since June 1999. Investigators have reopened the case. A woman paused halfway between the snack aisle and the register, her plastic bottle of orange soda dripping condensation in her hand. Her eyes locked onto the screen. The reporter continued. Authorities believe foul play was involved. Barrett was last seen leaving a high school graduation party with his girlfriend, Sadie Quinn, who remains missing. The image shifted to an old yearbook photo, Eli grinning beside his rust-red bike, and Sadie, arms crossed, a little reserved, standing beside him. The woman in the gas station gripped the bottle tighter, her jaw clenched. "Ma'am?" the cashier asked. "You all right?" She blinked, then nodded, her voice brittle. "Yes, that was someone I used to know." She left the soda on the counter and walked out without another word. 3 days later, Jillian's phone buzzed just as she stepped out of the sheriff's office. She didn't recognize the number, but something about the area code caught her eye. She answered. A woman's voice came through, low and measured. "Hi, is this Jillian Barrett?" "Yes," Jillian replied cautiously. "My name is Sarah Keller. I think I may have information about the case you're working on. I saw your brother's picture on the news." Jillian stopped walking. "What kind of information?" There was a pause. "Not over the phone, but I think it's time I told you what happened." The line went dead. Jillian stared at her phone. A reverse lookup later confirmed the call came from Caledonia, a small rural town about 60 miles north. She headed back inside and found Caleb organizing files at his desk. "Drop what you're doing," she said. "We're going for a drive." The town of Caledonia barely registered on the map. It had a single blinking traffic light, 2 churches, and a diner that hadn't changed its menu since the Clinton administration. The house they pulled up to was a modest 1-story with peeling white trim and a lattice fence that leaned like it was tired of standing. An older woman met them at the door, early 60s, soft-spoken, holding back a German shepherd that barked twice before retreating. "Sarah's in the back garden," she said. They followed a stone path around the side. The woman sitting at the patio table had her back to them. She was tracing her finger along a crack in the tabletop, her hair pulled into a loose knot. When she turned around, Jillian stopped breathing. Thinner, older, with lines that hadn't been there before. The same soft-set eyes, same angular jaw. And the moment she saw Jillian, she stood. "I never thought I'd see you again," Sadie said, her voice trembling. "You look so much like Eli now." Jillian couldn't speak. Caleb stepped in gently. "Sarah Keller?" She nodded once but didn't sit down. "Sadie Quinn." The room was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. Caleb had dimmed the harsh ceiling light to ease the tension, but nothing could soften the weight in the air. Sadie sat stiffly across from him, her hands folded tightly on the table. Jillian stood nearby, silent, her arms crossed, jaw clenched. "You need to start from the beginning," Caleb said gently. Sadie glanced down, her voice fragile. "They got it all wrong. Everyone, for 25 years. She paused. "I didn't run away. Eli and we were in love. He wasn't some reckless boy. He was thoughtful, steady. We were going to leave after graduation and start fresh somewhere new. He had it all planned out." Jillian lowered her gaze. "You were going to leave that night?" Sadie nodded slowly. "After the party. Eli had fixed up the bike, mapped out a ride, said the stars were out and the ridge road would be beautiful under the moonlight." She closed her eyes briefly. "But Xander, he was watching us. I know that now. He couldn't let go." Caleb leaned forward. "Xander Dorsey?" She nodded again. "We'd dated the year before. It ended badly. He had a temper, possessive, paranoid. When I moved on with Eli, he started showing up at my house, leaving notes. Once he even left a dead bird on my porch. My mom said to let it go, that his father was the sheriff. No one would believe me anyway." "And Eli?" Jillian asked. "He knew. I downplayed it, but he was starting to get worried. Said he'd confront him if it continued." Sadie's voice cracked, but she pressed on. "That night after the party, we took off on Eli's bike. It was supposed to be our start, just the 2 of us. The stars were so bright, you could see everything." She swallowed hard. "Then we noticed headlights behind us. At first, Eli thought it was a hunter or someone else leaving late, but the truck didn't pass us. It followed us, closer and closer." Caleb kept his voice calm. "Did you see who was driving?" "Not at first, but as it pulled up beside us on the ridge, I recognized the decal, the sheriff's truck. We thought it was Roland. Maybe he was patrolling. Eli slowed, but then..." Then we saw it wasn't him. Her hands trembled. It was Xander. Jillian stiffened. He stole his father's truck? I think Roland gave it to him, or at least let him use it. Either way, Xander didn't try to pass us. He swerved at us. Eli yelled and tried to pull away, but there wasn't much space. We were too close to the edge. She looked down, her voice barely audible. He rammed us, right into the ravine. The room fell silent. I don't remember the fall, Sadie murmured. I just remember waking up in the dark. My leg was broken. Eli was beside me, not moving. There was blood. His neck was... She shook her head. He was gone. She looked up at Jillian. He didn't suffer. Jillian turned away, jaw trembling. I don't know how long I lay there. A day, maybe two. I drifted in and out. Then someone found me, an older man, Leo. Leo? Caleb asked. He lived in a trailer off the logging road. A quiet type. Not all there, mentally, but kind. He carried me back, nursed my wounds. I begged him to take me to the hospital, but he wouldn't. Said he didn't trust outsiders, that the sheriff would come after us both. Caleb frowned. He knew about the sheriff? He didn't explain, just said the people up there were dangerous. Maybe he was paranoid, but I was scared. And when I heard the news, how the search had ended with nothing found, I figured they'd written us off, maybe even blamed us. So you stayed hidden. I stayed alive. By the time the story was finished, Jillian had sunk into the nearest chair, silent and pale. Caleb folded his arms. And Leo? Passed away 3 years ago. I took his last name, Keller, and moved towns. Why now? Jillian finally asked. Sadie's eyes welled. Because I saw his picture on the news. Eli, that bike. And I knew. I couldn't stay hidden anymore. Caleb stood. We'll need you to come back with us, make a formal statement. Sadie hesitated. If they know I'm alive, they'll come after me. You're not alone anymore, Caleb said. We'll keep you safe. They didn't notice the car parked 2 blocks down the road, engine idling. Inside, a figure lowered a pair of binoculars and reached for the radio. She's alive. Detective Caleb Voss leaned over the cluttered caseboard, the string lines now intersecting with fresh printouts, some yellowed photographs, and new notations in bold red. He wasn't just reviewing Sadie's statement, he was challenging decades of silence. He turned toward Jillian, who sat across from him, thumbing through a binder of archived evidence. Do you see this? Caleb pointed to a copy of an old police report, dated June 1999. A witness account filed 2 weeks before Eli vanished. It described a confrontation behind the high school gym. Xander Dorsey allegedly lunged at Eli, shouting threats, only to be pulled away by 2 friends. The report ended mid-sentence. No follow-up, no interviews, just a stapled note. Filed, no action required. Jillian's eyes narrowed, and no one thought to look at this again. Caleb didn't answer. He was already shifting his focus to a grainy photo from the ravine site taken just days after the crash. Here, he said, tapping the image. Tire tracks at the ridge, deep, wide set. These weren't from the coroner's van or search crews. I had them enhanced. They match a make and model that was in Sheriff Dorsey's personal use records that year. Jillian didn't speak, just nodded slowly. They both knew what that meant. Corroboration. A pattern. Cover-up. Word of the reopened investigation spread fast. Too fast. Within days, Caleb began receiving calls from officials higher up the ladder. A deputy mayor, an old judge, even the chief of police in a tone that sounded more like a warning than concern. Roland Dorsey, the chief had said, served this town for 27 years. Maybe you're chasing the wrong ghost, detective. By the following afternoon, Caleb noticed a different chill in the precinct. Files he'd flagged went mysteriously missing from the digital archive. 2 witness statements Jillian had mentioned from Sadie's birthday were no longer accessible due to administrative error. Someone was scrubbing history clean. And fast. He turned to Jillian in the break room, voice low. They're trying to discredit Sadie. saying she's unstable, that I'm inexperienced, that this is a vendetta. Then we go louder, she said, jaw set. If they want to bury this, we bring it into the light. It was just after sunset when Caleb, Jillian, and Sadie pulled up to the Dorsey residence, a sprawling house perched at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, shadowed by old sycamores and silence. The driveway was empty. No porch lights, no glow from the windows. Caleb stepped out first, warrant in hand, and climbed the front steps. The door creaked when he knocked. Then, no answer. He tried the handle, unlocked. Inside, the air was stale. One picture frame on the wall hung askew. The television was on, but muted. In the foyer, a travel bag lay overturned, clothes scattered like someone had packed in haste. Upstairs, drawers hung open. Sadie stood in the doorway, arms folded tightly. "They're gone," she whispered. At that moment, Caleb's radio crackled. "All units, be on the lookout. Bolo just issued for Black Lincoln Navigator, Newman County plate, belongs to Roland Dorsey. 3 occupants, believed to be fleeing." It took less than an hour for State Patrol to locate the vehicle. Dash cams from multiple cruisers captured the pursuit as it crossed into the neighboring county. Sirens blaring, floodlights sweeping the road. Aerial footage showed the SUV cornered near a way station. Helicopters hovered as officers moved in from all sides. The footage later aired on every local station. Roland Dorsey face down on the pavement, handcuffed under the pulsing glare of red-blue lights. His son Xander sat beside him, bloodied from his own resistance. Their wives stood at the shoulder, children crying quietly in the back seat, stunned. No one expected the fall to come so fast. Back at the precinct, Caleb entered the interrogation room with Roland first. The former sheriff sat with his arms calmly folded, leaning back in the metal chair as if hosting a casual meeting. "You're making a mistake," he said coolly. "You have no idea what you've stepped into. I've got counsel on the way." "You've been protecting a killer for 25 years, Caleb replied, voice steady. "You misled a murder investigation, tampered with evidence, buried statements. That ends tonight." Roland smiled faintly, almost in pity. "Do your job, son, but you're wasting time." Caleb let the silence stretch before walking out. Xander sat differently, nervous, twitching fingers, sweat darkening his collar. Caleb entered and said nothing for a while, just observed. "Whatever you think happened," Xander began, but the door opened again and Sadie stepped in. She didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, calm, watching. Xander's expression shifted instantly, pale, eyes wide. I thought you were dead," he stammered. "I guess fate had other plans," she said evenly. Xander swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to. I just wanted to scare him. He took you from me. I didn't know you survived." The confession spilled out fast, disjointed and panicked. Caleb motioned to the mirrored window and Sadie stepped out. It was all on tape. Caleb walked into the next room with the video playback queued up. He set it in front of Roland and let the tape run. Xander's voice echoed across the room. "I didn't know you were still alive. I just wanted to scare him." Roland didn't move at first. Then, slowly, he leaned forward, rested his elbows on the table, and exhaled. "He called me that night," Roland said at last. "Panicked, screaming. I drove up there. I found the wreck. He was crying, didn't know what to do. So I did what a father does. I fixed it, burned the files, redirected the search effort away from the ridge. I told myself they'd never be found. They were just kids." Caleb didn't blink. "You buried a murder." Roland shook his head weakly. "I buried a scandal, one that would have brought this town to its knees." "No," Caleb said quietly. "You buried Eli Barrett." The courtroom was packed. Cameras hovered outside the courthouse for weeks. Local news vans double-parked across the street, and the town of Overlook Ridge became a name on state and national headlines. The trial of Roland and Xander Dorsey wasn't just about justice. It was about legacy, power, and what silence costs. Sadie took the stand first. She wore a plain blouse, no makeup. Her voice held steady as she recounted the night of the crash, how Eli had suggested a ride beneath the stars, how they were run off the road by a truck with a sheriff's decal, Xander behind the wheel. "He didn't slow down," she told the jury. "He rammed us. Eli tried to protect me, and he died for it." The courtroom sat in breathless silence. Expert witnesses followed. Tire mark analysts, forensic technicians, even a retired archivist who had salvaged search maps altered by Rowland in '99. The state painted a damning picture of deception carried across 2 decades. Rowland Dorsey, once the town's pillar of law and order, was convicted of obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and being an accessory after the fact. The verdict came with little deliberation. Xander Dorsey was found guilty of second-degree murder. The defense argued it was an accident, that he never meant to kill Eli, but the prosecution replayed his taped confession for the jury. "I just wanted to scare him." It was enough. When the sentencing was handed down, Rowland received 25 years. Xander got 30. Neither man showed emotion as they were led from the courtroom. But outside, the town stood fractured, some in quiet applause, others stunned into anger, clinging to old loyalties. Eli Barrett's body was returned to his family in a new casket. Jillian stood beneath a broad oak at the edge of the cemetery, hands clasped in front of her. The morning was cool. Mist still lingered at the tree line as mourners gathered around a small plot adorned with white lilies and river stones. Sadie stood quietly near the grave, her hands shaking slightly as she placed a single bloom atop the lid. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Jillian nodded, her voice catching in her throat. He didn't die in vain. A few rows back, Caleb stood with his hands in his coat pockets. The state police commissioner had formally commended him the day before, praised his tenacity, his instincts, his refusal to accept an old story at face value. But none of that seemed to matter now. He was watching the people, the ones who finally knew what happened, the ones who never would have believed it without proof, the ones who, for better or worse, would never forget the name Eli Barrett again. A week later, Sadie returned to the overlook. Wildflowers had taken root along the edge, soft yellow and pale purple pushing up through cracks in the earth, as if trying to heal what had never been mended. She sat near the spot where the guardrail bent slightly outward, where the ravine began its steep, silent descent. The wind was gentle now, no longer howling. In her hand was a small silver locket, tarnished around the edges, but still intact. Inside was a photo of her and Eli from their last high school dance, his arm around her shoulder, her smile barely contained. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes and breathed. He wasn't just a boy I loved. He was the first person who made me feel safe, the first one who saw all of me and didn't flinch. He gave his life trying to protect mine. I never got to say goodbye, but I'll spend the rest of mine honoring what we had. She placed the locket gently at the base of a flowering rock cleft, just inches from the ledge. A small stone held it in place. Then she stood. One last glance down into the trees below, the place where everything had gone silent that night. And she turned to walk away. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.